And I want to welcome you all to this special information evening where the Melbourne Chevra Kadisha has teamed up together with Hatzolah, Melbourne and the Coroners Court of Victoria. Tonight is all about coming together to share knowledge and insights and to strengthen the ways our organisations can work together in harmony. It's great to see so many faces. They're all familiar to me, ready to dive in and discuss how we can better serve our community during their challenging times in dealing with the coroner. We'll be talking about the important role that the Coroners Court plays and how it operates. This is a fantastic opportunity to learn, to ask questions, and to understand more about the processes involved. We really appreciate all of your attendance and look forward to a lively and informative evening. I'm delighted to welcome and thank Mohammed Mohadeen, who is the Senior Coordinator of the Multicultural Advisory Committee. Mohammed's work has been pivotal in fostering inclusivity and understanding within our diverse communities. His tireless efforts have not only strengthened the bonds among various cultural groups, but have also brought about meaningful change in policies affecting multicultural communities. I'd like to welcome Coroner Simon McGregor. Prior to being appointed as a coroner in 2018, Simon was a member of the Victorian Bar for 21 years. He both practiced and published in administrative and human rights law, health and regulatory law, inquests, commissions and proceeds of crime, and other investigation spaces. During his career, he worked on the police shootings trials, the HMAS Melbourne Voyager litigation, the Kerrang train and truck collision, and the parolee murder cluster inquests. As a coroner, he's best known for his work triggering the AFL to review its concussion policies, his review of the appropriateness of Victoria's pill testing and voluntary assisted dying schemes, and his recent Indigenous death in custody and care inquests. Although he has also presided in excess of 3,600 other coronial determinations during his term, all of which are equally important to those associated families. Jody Leditsky is a distinguished professional known for her exceptional contributions in her field. With a career marked by dedication, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to excellence, Jody's journey is a testament to the power of perseverance and the impact that one individual can have on their industry and community. Jody's career has been built upon years of experience and continual learning. Throughout her career, she has held various pivotal roles, each of which has contributed to her expansive knowledge and expertise. Jody has been instrumental in driving significant projects and initiatives to success. Her work not only reflects her professional prowess, but also her passion for making a positive difference in the world. Leading Senior Constable Pramala Tevar is a member of the Police Coronial Support Unit, a Victoria Police unit attached to the Coroners Court of Victoria. Pramala has been a sworn member of the Victoria Police for the past 14 years. She started her career as a probationary constable at Paran Police Station, gaining 7 years of diverse general duties policing experience before training to become a police prosecutor. Pramala went on to work at the Melbourne Prosecutions Unit, prosecuting matters in the Melbourne Magistrates Court and Children's Court, where she was a member of the Specialist Sexual Offences Unit. After gaining experience in the criminal jurisdiction, Pramala turned her focus to the coronial jurisdiction and has been a member of the Police Coronial Support Unit for the past 5 years. In her role at the Police Coronial Support Unit, Pramala draws on her years of policing experience to provide guidance and advice to frontline police members investigating deaths as directed by the coroner. William Doolan is a dedicated and compassionate family liaison officer at the Coroners Court, known for his empathy and professionalism in guiding families through the often challenging and emotional process of the coronial system. In 2023, he moved into his current role as family liaison officer, where he continues to make a significant impact through his expertise in psychology and anthropology, coupled with his ongoing studies in a Master of Social Work at Monash University. William's career is underscored by his extensive experience in crisis intervention, trauma-informed care and advocacy. William's ability to assist families with kindness and understanding is a testament to his dedication to alleviating the burdens faced by those navigating the coronial system. His diverse background and specialised knowledge uniquely position him to offer invaluable support and guidance during some of the most difficult periods in the lives of those he serves. I'm now going to pass it over to Simon to take us through the day in the life of the coronial system. You've got your mic's good, so I'll just leave that with Prem.
Thanks, Simon. Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you very much for having us here today, welcoming us into your community. I think this is one of those talks where we will learn as much from you all as you might learn. I hope you learn from us. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we gathered on today, the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also pay my respects to all cultures that are present here sharing this evening with us. We thought the best way to give you an insight into our work is to have an informal session where you can ask questions of us whenever they come up, and we'll make sure the right person answers it for you. But we'll just talk you through a day in the life of what we do at the Coroners Court and where our circles intersect. So feel free to ask us specific questions about your world, or pick up on the threads that we share with you. So, and what you'll see here as we give this talk is that even though we're a court, the name is a bit misleading because the only person with a law degree here is me. It's a multidisciplinary institution with a lot of different skills, and as you'll see as we talk through a day in the life, you'll see how all those come to bear. And whilst there's a judge, a coroner is the type of judge in our system, on duty at the start, and by the time we make the judicial findings at the end of the process, that's signed by a judge. In the middle, there are all these different specialist skill sets that we use, and it's why it's such a fascinating place to work, but it's also almost a little bit misleading to call it a court. We do call it a court though, because what that gives you is constitutional independence, and that is an important thing when it's your job to look at, from an independent perspective, unexpected and unexplained deaths. The community has the confidence in that when that has the separation of powers protection. So the judiciary are different from Parliament and different from the executive government, and that's where the coroner might have to at some stage criticise government or Parliament about the state of the laws, government about the way they conduct themselves. There are various models around the world, but experience has shown us when you have that full constitutional independence, you get the frankest and most fearsome independent evaluation. So that's why we do it. That's about probably as lawyery as we'll get tonight. But there are other countries in the world where coroners are part of the police departments. There are other countries in the world where coroners are just medical specialists. We incorporate all those features and we get a judge to be a coroner. So the court is comprised of, we have 13 coroners, but it's unlike any other court that you'll visit because we are open every hour of every day of the year. There is a coroner on duty. There's 13 of us coroners. There is we have an admissions area where bodies are coming and going. There's staff on all around the clock, finding out what's just happened, taking inquiry phone calls. Jodie will explain this to us when we get there. But so it's a busy place at all times. We have surgical facilities in there. We have our police team, and we have, from the social work family perspective, Will and his team. But so what we do is we get reports of unexpected and unexplained deaths need to be reported to the coroner. And now there's a technical definition of the Act that I'm not giving it to you. you don't need to know it. If you have any queries, you can ask us, and we like to be asked. But if I just want to give it to you in plain English, it's unexpected and unexplained deaths. If someone can explain the death, that's usually a doctor. If you've got a death certificate from somewhere, you don't need to report it to us. But if it was unexpected or unexplained. So we get, each year, we get just under 8,000 unexpected, unexplained deaths. So that means, just doing the maths, it's 25 to 50 new death investigations every day. So that's why we're around the clock working. And what we are doing, and I'll get Prem to explain to us, it's usually the police that help with reporting the death, and they'll get Jody to explain to us what they start doing in the coronial admissions and inquiries office once we're notified of the death. But we're getting 25 to 50 new ones every day. That means each coroner, between the 13 of us, we're on duty about once a fortnight. We're on duty for a full 24-hour window. And somewhere in that cycle, usually at 10 or 11 in the morning, we have a triage type meeting of all the new cases. So half of the day is piling up the new ones, getting them ready. We all get in the one spot with a pathologist who's like a surgical level medical specialist on what people have died of. We have the administrative team who have been gathering together all the information. We have a police officer ready to go, and you have the coroner, and we have a triage meeting about what we need to do on each of those different cases, and they then stay with us. That coroner takes those investigations right through to the end, and sometimes that is what we would call quick, and that is sometimes just within a couple of days when it's a very simple or well-documented case. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 months for something that turns out to be natural causes, although it was unexpected and it was a shock. Once we look at it with our expertise, with our CT scanner, our MRI scanner, our pathologist experts, our toxicologists, we can explain to the family. And some of them then need detailed background investigation where, usually led by a police officer, that starts gathering those witness statements, and that evidence takes quite a while to come through. So whilst we have an average closure time at the court of 8 months or so to finish an investigation, in fact that's really just a mathematical average. There is maybe 40% of the cases are done within about 12 weeks. Some of them are trip over other criminal processes like a criminal trial or a OC-Health, a work-safe prosecution or something like that, and they might take 3 to 5 years, even though the bit the coroner's going to do with it is not that long. And some of ours involve really complicated things like reviewing, like deaths in custody, and where we have to review a lot of different systems, and they take us a while too. So whilst the average is 8.5 months, most of you will be hearing back from us within a couple of days to until about 12 weeks. But so coroners, we each need to, by the time you divide up that workload, we need to do 600 investigations each per year. So, you've got, in the end, your work is 365 days a year, you have some holidays, you do some training, you're probably working about 250 days a year with your team. So each day, if I am not finishing about 2 investigations, I'm falling behind on once a fortnight getting 25 to 50 new ones. So we really have these processes set up, and we're quite targeted about what we ask for and who we ask it of. But so that's our workload. To get through that process then involves this amazing multidisciplinary team that I love working with. And perhaps if I throw over to Prem now to talk through how does a death get reported and how does Jody come to know about it?
So I'm from the Police Coronial Support Unit. I'll just explain a little bit about our office. We're not actually frontline operational police members. We don't actually go out and attend death scenes, but we do, like our name suggests, offer support to the coroners, to Jody's office at coronial admissions and inquiries, and to police officers that are investigating deaths on behalf of the coroner. So how does a death get reported to the coroner? Well, the coroners, they're not out on patrol, so typically a call will come through 000 or police will attend an incident. Just if I use the example of a road traffic collision, a road fatality, police will attend the scene when it's been reported to them that someone has died or someone is dying. Usually ambulance will be on scene as well. They will verify the death. Once the death has been verified, then the police officers that are on scene will get in touch with Jodie's office at coronial admissions and get a case number for the death. And from there, that's where the coronial jurisdiction really starts. So at the scene, police will process the scene just like they would any other incident or crime scene. There'll be photos taken, people spoken to, sometimes statements taken, evidence gathered. But from that point on, police will then prepare what we call a report of death for the coroner. You may have heard it in the news when they say that police are preparing a report for the coroner. That's usually what they're talking about. It's essentially a 2-page document that contains all of the initial information that the coroner will need to make decisions about the case. So that will be details of the deceased person, details of the next of kin, and enough information about the circumstances of the death for the coroner to make some preliminary decisions that will be talked about later. That will then get submitted to Jodie's team at Coronial Admissions and Inquiries, and like Simon said, that is a 24-hour service. So that is the initial part that police will attend. There'll be some preliminary investigations, then that's handed over to VIFM and Coronial Admissions, and then the process starts from there.
Thanks, Prima. Hello, everyone. And my name's Jodie, and I work for VIFM, which is the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine. So that's an organisation that's actually in the same building as the Coroners Court and works very, very closely with them. So the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine and my office, the Coronial Admissions and Inquiries, and also the mortuary, which I manage, is responsible for the care of the deceased person while they're in our building. So, as Prima said, that when a death occurs, police attend and they call into my office. My office is 24/7. 24/7, a nurse is there or a medical or legal officer to answer that phone. Now, that phones that come through that office is probably, we get about 200 phone calls to 300 a day, and we make about 300 phone calls a day. So most of those phone calls that come through to our office are from doctors. So we also get reports from police. But the other thing nowadays that we get a lot of are doctors. So doctors ring us to ask whether a death is reportable or not. So like many people don't want often for the death to come to the coroner's office. So the doctors ring us to ask whether it's reasonable to write a death certificate. And our nurses will advise that and provide them with some guidance. Sometimes we do get a death certificate in that instance, and then we can say that death is not reportable and may directly transfer to a funeral home. But when a doctor can't write a certificate or is advised under whatever reason not to, we create a case number. And the police ring us or the doctors, and then we organise for the transfer of the deceased person into the mortuary. One of the first things that happens in the mortuary is that we now have a CT scanner. Some people may know about that, but that has changed a lot in what we do. So the CT scan now, as the deceased comes in, is then reviewed by the doctors the next morning. They will then, also with that information that they've gathered from the police, will then make a recommendation on whether an autopsy is necessary or not. In only 40% of our cases that come through our door now, an autopsy is required. So as Coroner McGregor, Simon, you're okay for Simon? Simon said, at 11 o'clock each day, every morning, the pathologist has gone through that CT scan and also any medical history or any information they've received from the police to make a decision. But while that's happening, our nurses in the CAE are calling the families. One of the first stages, what they need to do is establish who to talk to. And that can be really confusing if you've ever any family that's rang into our office. We are available 24/7 for families to call for advice. But one of the first things we need to establish is what we call, under the Act, the senior next of kin. A few people are nodding, so some people, hopefully, you may already know this, so forgive me, but the senior next of kin is a hierarchy that we need to address. So it's first off is the parent. It's a child over 18. It's the partner, child over 18. Then it goes to the parents. Then it goes to the siblings. So we go through that process, and when any person that rings, we'll step through them and then nominate who we're speaking to at that point in time. If a person isn't available, or they would like us to speak to somebody else because they're too distressed, remembering that it's almost within a few hours or within 24 hours of a death that they're calling us, they can nominate somebody else to talk to us. Our nurses will ask questions about medical history, and one of the most important questions they ask is what are their wishes or what is their beliefs about an autopsy. Some people say they really want to know, they want an autopsy to determine what's happened. Some people say, for certain reasons, they do not want an autopsy. That opinion on families is really important for the coroner. So it's really important for us to get that information by 11 o'clock in the morning, for us to have that for them to make a decision. So at that meeting, the coroner sits with one of my staff as well as with the doctor and goes through each case. Even if the family has not provided that opinion at that point in time, our coroners will say, I can't make a decision at this point. Please go back and find that family. Some cases, in some circumstances, they do have to direct an autopsy. So once that decision has been made by the coroner, we then ring the families a second time that afternoon. Because the coroner directs us, as nurses and the staff that I work with, to give that family an opportunity, if they've directed an examination such as an autopsy or no autopsy, to have an opinion or to ask for a different direction. There is a legal steps which we step people through, which need to be done. If a person has not having an autopsy, one of the next steps is us to formally identify somebody. So most people, when they die at home or with family around them, they will sign what we call a statement of identification with the family present. But in some cases, a deceased person is not found for a while, or in some cases, a person may be so traumatised that they can't actually be visually identified. So in those circumstances, we have to still undertake some sort of formal identification. So we have scientists that will either do DNA, fingerprints, or dental records. One of our first things for formal identification, unfortunately, is often dental records, and it's often the quickest way to do that. So once the medical examination is complete and the identification is complete, we then seek the funeral directors to send us in a paperwork, which many people know very well here, what we call a release authority, that tells us that this family has nominated this funeral director to come and take care of that body. Now, once all that paperwork's correct, I put that back to Simon, or back to our coroner. And that afternoon at about 3 o'clock, they're at least going through all those 20 cases to complete an order that allows for that deceased person to be released. It sounds quick. Sorry, do you want me to stop?
No, keep going.
Do you want to interrupt? Yeah. So that's what's happening routinely on a daily basis. At the same time, the mortuary is operating as well 24/7, undertaking all the examinations and preparing and releasing.
Maybe this is... if the microphone's picking up, thanks. Maybe this is a good time now, Jodie, as you're getting to releasing the bodies, the Division of Labour and the structure between the Institute of Forensic Medicine that gives us all that medical support and the court happens at the time that the body is then released back into the community. And getting towards what Will and his team do, helping families, when Jodie's been communicating with the family about what are their views about autopsy, did they have any concerns of care about the people, we start to get some clues about which families are having a particularly hard time with the grief reactions, which families are very upset about certain things that have happened, and we capture that information straight away, and then we're thinking ahead to, let's get the body back to you, let your funeral processes get underway, but we're thinking ahead to who might need a bit of extra explaining or a bit of extra comfort and counselling around the death process. It's sad for everyone, but it's harder for some people for those different reasons. So in the end, that's where Will and his team come in. And just before I throw it over to you though, Will, I wanted to just explain, in that triage meeting, the daily triage meeting with the 25 to 50 new cases, once the coroner is given the advice of the pathologist, the medical specialist who's looked at the body, and we've received the 1 or 2 page form from the police officer that found the body with what we knew about those circumstances, the coroner gives orders about what to do with the body. You have to give orders to move bodies around or to do an autopsy, and also requests certain type of further investigations. So if it's a car crash, if it's maybe a suicide, if it's maybe a drug overdose, we work through all that and we take our best guess at what's the most helpful things that our police officer that was there at the scene, our eyes and our ears, can go out and gather for us. So meantime, the coroner gives those orders there on the day. We need that body, send that body home, go and get me the pharmacy records, we better do an accident reconstruction about the car. We do all that stuff. And after Jodie has confirmed that we don't need the body anymore, the court file goes into registry, and as we start explaining the processes, then Will, I think it's a good time for you to tell us how does the registry communicate with families and with service providers and doctors and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, all family will get most of their communication from the court in written format, so email and post through the registry team. So each coroner has a registrar and a solicitor that manage that kind of correspondence. My team, the family liaison officers, or FLOs, as we're often referenced, we're made up of 7 staff members who are mostly part-time, so we're about 5.5 full-time staff, with backgrounds in social work, psychology, welfare, and recently nursing. So we've had a nurse join the team who's really helpful for explaining particularly cases where the coroner's investigating medical care. And we probably touch about maybe a bit over 20% of cases where the family are in need of a bit more support. So we support families in a trauma-informed way to understand the coronial process, including things like timeframes and the reasons for different things happening in our process. The other side of that coin, I guess, is that we support the coroner and the court staff to understand families' perspectives on an investigation. And the third part is coming to things like this, and also we have groups into the court from different community support services to, I guess, educate them on our process so they can take that information back to families that then they're supporting in their other services. So we don't provide counselling per se, but we do have conversations with families about grief and trauma, about how that physically and psychologically can present and ways to manage that. In cases where families need counselling, we refer to community services that pick that up. Some of the day-to-day things we're doing is, I guess we're acting as that constant person someone can reach out to or will reach out to them to explain the updates as they come up, to be able to ask the questions of, because they can't speak directly to the coroner. And we'll do things like assisting to submit applications to the court. So the most common application is an application to request coronial documents. So we help families with that, and then when information is released back to them, we can support them to review some potentially quite distressing material. particularly, so generally photos, videos, audio, that kind of stuff isn't released, but we can make arrangements for supported viewings of that material, whether that's coming into the court, doing it over video conferencing, or facilitating release to a counsellor or doctor or something like that. We get involved in, depends on the case when a flow might get involved. So there's certain, I guess, preemptive cases. So we will become involved with every case of a person who's passed away under the age of 18. We will be offering that support. It was suicides under age 26, but we've been trying to pick up every suicide case that comes through, and family violence homicides. But beyond that, we receive referrals from the coroners, from their solicitors and registrars, from CA&E, and from family themselves. So pretty much all of the correspondence that comes from the court will include our contact details, so families do refer themselves to us if they're needing that additional support. I think that was... Oh, and I guess once, we haven't got there, but eventually when we get to an inquest, that's also something we help with preparing for the legal process as well, of actually coming into court and talking about self-care and people's well-being when they're coming in for that purpose as well.
Yeah, that's a very good segue, thanks Will. So now that we've moved over into the court from VIFM, and the coroner has said, these are the sort of things like my police officer, that'd be helpful if you could get these records, speak to these people, particularly, it's an intersection of our spheres of influence. The coroner will always want to hear from family members, people who knew the deceased before and afterwards, to get a sense of the trajectory that this person was on that led to the unexpected, unexplained deaths. So Prem, part of then Prem's role can be when our police officers are having difficulties getting certain material, you help them with that and we figure out what we need and what we don't. Have you got any observations to share there about that process? I can say as a coroner it's really important to hear from families, but I understand that it's difficult and sometimes not everyone's ready to speak about it. Are there any other observations that you know, like that police say are the difficult things about investigating, putting the briefs together?
Maybe I can talk about brief preparation. So once the coroner has had a look at all of the information from the pathologists and all of the medical records and the preliminary investigation that police have done at the scene and in those first few days, then they will have a look at that with their legal team and make directions regarding how they want the investigation to go, what aspects they want police to focus on, and they'll oftentimes give specific instructions to the police member who's investigating. Usually it will be the police member that has attended the death scene because they have the first-hand knowledge of what's occurred. But for various different reasons, whether it's resourcing or level of expertise, sometimes that will get transferred to a specialist unit. Take the example of, say, drug overdoses. Victoria Police policy is that they will always be investigated by a detective, so someone from the criminal investigation unit. I think I forgot to mention at the death scene, police will, unless it's a death in hospital, police will always attend unexplained and unexpected deaths in the community. I think that can be quite confusing for families and people to have that police presence at the death, especially if it's someone that's passed away at home, or at first glance it appears like maybe from natural causes. It's very confusing to have police there and speaking to people, maybe taking photos and things like that. So I think the most important thing that I think we need to explain to people is just because police are there doesn't infer that there's a crime necessarily related to the death. We are there at the coroner's direction, and we are there to initiate the coronial jurisdiction by preparing that report for the coroner. So once it gets to the stage where the coroner has made some decisions about how they want the investigation to go, then they will provide police with what we call a brief request letter, and that will contain instructions on what they would like in a brief of evidence provided to them. So the police officers will then go back to the family of the deceased person, the friends, and ask for statements. Now, sometimes on the day of the death, a very brief statement will be taken from the people that were there, depending on their level of distress and what's occurred. So these brief request letters usually come out, they can come out quickly, but sometimes it might be a few months after the passing. So to have police come back and revisit this matter with families, I think can be quite distressing, but it's usually because the statement that was given at the time was brief, or we know more information now, or there's this particular aspect that the coroner wants to investigate further. So they will make contact with people, ask for details of other friends or witnesses, start speaking to people, taking statements, gathering records, contacting employers if it's something related to work. There's a lot of investigation that goes on that gets channelled out to specialist units. So if it is a fatal collision, vehicles might need to be examined by our mechanical inspection unit. If it's a suicide and there is some things that are unanswered about the circumstances or the stressors in that person's life leading up to the death, people's mobile phones may be analysed and things like that to give more information to the coroner. So all of these processes, and they can sometimes take months to go through. But after that, all of that is then put together. That will be put together in a coronial brief, which will then be presented to the coroner. And I think, from my experience, that's where the real full works begins, which can be a whole. Our brief is sometimes just the tip of the iceberg for then what goes on at the rest of the court.
Thanks, Prem. Yeah, let's talk about how this all ends now. You can see this multidisciplinary information gathering process is quite complex. When we are looking at things in the coronial jurisdiction, we're not looking to blame anyone, we're just trying to figure out what went on. It's not a blame jurisdiction. We have a silver lining that if we see things that could be improved, we can recommend things be done better. That's a nice thing, but first we've got to find out what went on. So that's what we're doing, and once that information has been gathered and the police officer's done his hard work for us, and meantime, within Will's unit there in the registry, whilst Will is the specialist caregiving and explainer unit, most of the registry is receiving information in from doctors, from hospitals, from government agencies, putting that all together, and that comes into the brief too. And then the coroner has another moment of saying, right, have I now, as an investigation here on the papers, can I do the jobs Parliament wants me to do? And so the reason we exist is to find in every one of these unexpected, unexplained deaths, what's the identity of the person, what did they die of, what's the cause of death, and what were the background circumstances. And that information is very important for not just peace of mind, because we all know how traumatic it is for people, how sad it is for unexpected deaths. And for every person that dies, there's a ripple out to families, co-workers, all that. So that's why it's important that, despite it being unexpected, we can give the community an explanation. And then those public records are used in the state of Victoria to plan what sort of hospitals do we need, what sort of police force do we need. Gathering that information helps the planning of the state. So that's why it's important, and why we're going to this, an enormous amount of effort. Sometimes when the cause of death looks pretty obvious, and it might be, but it might not be, so we've got to check. If you want reliable data, you've got to check. So we gather all this, and then that comes back to the coroner. So I have a registrar from Will, having had a doctor and a police officer help me get this brief together. It's come back in through the registry with Will's team and any other bits and pieces. And then I have a solicitor that helps me, and we read all that evidence together, and the coroner makes a decision about how can I end this investigation? Can I answer my questions of the identity, the cause of death, the background circumstances? And whilst looking at those three questions, have I noticed a way where I could recommend that something could be done better? If that is a possibility, I have another chance here to get a subject matter expert into the team who might be a child paediatrician or an emergency physician or a town planner or an aircraft designer, whatever I need to look at this and give me some expert advice about whether that could be done better or not. And then I can make those recommendations. So the closure pathway is then, have I got enough information here on paper that I can make a judicial finding on paper, and we don't need to have a court hearing about it. If I'm still not sure about a few things, and this is the moment where the coroner, who's been the lead investigator, starts to look a bit more like a traditional judge. If I'm still not sure on the papers, the coroner then says, all right, I'll step back as the investigator. I appoint a counsel assisting, and it might be a specially trained police officer or a barrister. They'll finish off the investigation, but everyone else that I'm unsure about, you've got a chance to come to court too and explain it from your point of view, and I listen to all of that like a normal judge. And then having had some oral evidence, we call that an inquest. It starts to look like a more normal court hearing at that point. We have an inquest. I then think about the oral evidence as well as the rest of the evidence, and in the end, I'll make a determination about what went on. So the stats around that are, and the court hearings are, again, it's a reliving a particularly emotional experience, and I'll come back to Will about how his team can help there. But the statistics are that about 99% of my investigations I can solve on the papers. With the help of all these people, I know the answers, I can write that down. And that's then a judicial finding, it's a court order, it becomes part of the public record of Victoria. But in those 1%ers, we need to go to inquest. Will, can I then throw it back to you? So what sort of, how do you work with the families, and what sort of things are going on for the inquest?
Hopefully we already have a rapport built with the family to have that kind of relationship where we are supporting them already, but we will be called in sometimes at the inquest stage. And I guess most of the work is done before the inquest with the family, so we're having conversations about preparing for what is going to be a very emotional, draining, sometimes re-traumatizing experience. Hearing witnesses talk over the circumstances of your loved one's passing. So we have conversations about simple things like how are you going to get to the court, is someone driving you, where to park, where to get lunch, how to look after yourself on the day, so knowing that you can get up and leave the courtroom at any time, even if someone's speaking. We have family rooms at the court, so we will book those for families. So if you're, say, at a week-long inquest, you will have like a base. If we have capacity, you'll have a base where you can kind of escape the courtroom and go have a private space. And we can stream the courtroom into that room as well, so you can still catch all of the evidence while being, alone or with your supports. So we're having those kind of conversations about making a plan for how you're going to look after yourself while engaging with that process. And we make referrals. There's an organisation called Court Network, which is a volunteer organisation of people who will come and actually sit with you in the court. So we always encourage families to bring their own supports, and sometimes they don't, but there will always be someone there with them, someone they can ask questions to, someone to get them a cup of tea, show them where the bathrooms are, whatever it is. But yeah, that's what we do.
Thanks, Will. So then after the inquest... Sorry.
Are you okay if we maybe open it up to some questions?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I did. Yep, and we're almost finished our set piece here anyway, but the last thing I would add is then, having done the inquest, we've probably solved it all by investigation. The inquest is the hearing, we listen to the evidence, and then we write it up. When we make a recommendation about doing something better, mostly what we will be doing is putting people's mind at ease about that's why they died, that's how they died. But when we make a recommendation, we can't force anyone to do it, but so it's just a recommendation. We're not an enforcement agency like the Sheriff's Office or IBAC or things like that. We make recommendations. The only thing the parties have to do is they have to respond. So they don't have to agree with us, but they have to say they do agree or they don't and why. And then in reality, we get about 90% of what we recommend people agree with and implement, because, as I said, we've got this process where we can get independent experts. We're independent ourselves, and we can get independent experts to help us. So in the end, by the time we go through our process, not many people don't agree with us, but the recommendations are all then published on our website and in Parliament, and you can imagine that if you've not followed a recommendation from the coroner and something happens again, then you're in big trouble wherever that might be. in the media, in a negligence case, with the government cancelling your tender, whatever. People, if you've been told, like accidents do happen, and no one knows that better than coroners, but if you've been told and it happens again, well, at that point, it wasn't an accident. So that's sort of that's our process. Yeah, I'm sorry if we've talked over questions that were ready to go there earlier on, but great. Please fire away.
Maybe I'll just moderate if there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to address directly to any of the panel? Sure, well, Mrs. May.
At what stage in the process is the body released? You can't keep them for 8 months or something like that, do you?
At what stage is the body released?
So at what time or how many days? Is that the question? No. So generally, depending on the circumstances, most deceased persons are with us between 5 and 7 days, and sometimes we can expedite that, or this process happens after, or the report after the deceased has left our care.
I've got a very big loud voice. Yeah, but I'm sorry. Okay. You mentioned before that there's you do a CT scan, a CAT scan. What other tests or procedures can you do that are non-invasive? That are non-invasive. Yeah.
So we not only CT scan, we also do blood tests. We do overnight what we call toxicology. So it really is, and it's also an external examination by the doctors. So what we call a no autopsy procedure consists of blood tests, which may be the toxicology, and they're usually drugs, the CT scan and an external examination.
I've actually got 2 questions, one slightly macabre. What's the capacity of the mortuary? The capacity of the mortuary, how many bodies?
Our capacity? So at the moment we have the capacity for 270. At any one night we have about 200 deceased persons with us. We can, during the flu season, June and July, go way up. We've just renovated, which means now we can have the capacity for 386. And unfortunately for us, I'm sure you understand, we also have to plan just in case something happens, that we have to plan for a mass disaster if need be, and that's why we've got that capacity.
So it actually leads to my next question. If you do have a mass casualty event, is it one coroner that looks after all the cases, or is it a separate coroner and you have a combined finding?
So
Jodie was here during the bushfires, so she's a great person to answer.
So in a mass such as the Victorian bushfires, back a little while now, we do have the state coroner usually oversees all and then allocates it maybe to a small number. It's really up to the state coroner on that day and at that event to take that decision, but often it will sit with the state coroner. In saying that as in the bushfires, we worked for hours and hours with multiple different coroners because everyone needs a break, just to identify and release people as soon as possible.
But sometimes there was the asthma cluster. I think that was a group of 10 or 15 people. That was a convenient number to send them all to one coroner. So whilst they might have happened a few days apart and a few different coroners were on duty, we'd make a special arrangement there with those ones to send them all to one place. But say bushfires, the numbers were so overwhelming it had to be a team approach, and then the state coroner oversees that. And so really case by case as to whether there's a synergy for doing things together or they are all unique, so there's no synergies in clustering them.
What happens in the case of a criminal event, like say the Burke Street massacre? Is that again one coroner or state coroner looks after that, or again is it separated out?
Yep, that one we kept with one coroner. The same, it's a good point to make here, that the same forensics team from police photograph and document and tag everything, whether it's for a homicide investigation or for the coroner. And that's one of the things we triage and we talk about in the triage meeting on the day. the homicide squad will have heard about the report of a death, and they might straight away put their hand up and say, this one's going to be a homicide investigation, or they might be in the maybe category, or they decide later. And we keep in touch with them, and either way there will be an investigation, either from the coroner or the homicide squad. So all the forensics proceeds as usual, and then we just keep in touch. If the homicide squad gets to the point of saying, we will lay some charges here, it's important within your legal philosophy that someone has the right to be innocent until proven guilty. So at that point, the coroner just waits. But if charges are laid, nothing's proven, or there's an acquittal, or they get off on an appeal, which means nothing's proven, it comes back to the coroner then to find the facts of what went on. So one way or another, all that information is used, and if nothing happens in the criminal sphere, the coroner will say the identity, say the cause of death, and give the background circumstances.
Could I actually, on that point, if you might want to explain a little bit about clustering investigations that might be separate in time and date, but similar in theme. I know such like the transgender suicide cluster, things like that.
Yeah, we have done a few of those recently where there's certain types of death that have certain similarities in the background. So we had one with transgender people and suicide, and we've also had one with infant deaths. So sometimes part of what we do with our own like surveillance of what's going on out there, at the right moment, if we notice themes or trends, of course we communicate with the different people that are working in that space, but we also look internally to say, is there a more effective way for us to do this, because they're going to draw on the same sort of expertise and they're going to involve the same sort of institutions and that sort of stuff. So we often find that the unique details outweigh what might be the common themes, so we don't do it often, but we do occasionally cluster, where we've got to see a synergy and a savings. Otherwise, we think there's something very good about having this duty system where you don't get a particular coroner that has a particular favourite type of case. We just get the cookie crumbles evenly for all of us, and that keeps things as even across the state as possible.
I'll preface my remarks just on asking from the position of our community and our particular religious beliefs and requirements as far as death and burial. So first of all, my first question, I actually have a couple of questions. My first question is with regard to if there is an unexpected or unexplained death and the doctor's not able to provide a death certificate, does that automatically require the body is taken into the mortuary?
No. It has to be reported to us, and usually the body will need to be transported to us, but not always.
Not always.
Yeah,
okay.
And we certainly figure that out very quickly.
Okay, so it's not an absolute requirement that has to happen? No. Okay. Second question is, what sort of considerations are made for our community that burial needs to take place as quickly as possible? Yep. Yes.
We're aware of that. And other cultures have a similar view. So the way that the legislation is worded, and I'm saving you the boring bits, but I can order an autopsy if it is necessary to find a cause of death. Now, necessary is a very strong word, and in fact it was a Jewish community case that led to this Supreme Court decision where they said that's what it means. It means there must be no other way that you can do the job that Parliament told you to do without doing an autopsy. So when a cause of death is allowed to be, the pathologist is allowed to say the cause of death is unascertained, which sort of means I don't know what it is, but you write that in the box, that's what the cause of death is, and that is about 6% of all deaths, right? That's as good as we can get. Once you're allowed to say that, well, in what situations would it be necessary to do an autopsy? There's not many. But in my experience as a coroner, the only time I've done it was on another Jewish community case where a person had died in care, and what they may have died of was possibly an infectious disease in a community where there were other vulnerable people around and other visitors, and so we had a situation where maybe an infectious disease was spreading to harm other people, and I thought that was necessary in the public interest to do an autopsy. And once I'd explained that to the family that really had a preference for there to be no autopsy and immediate burial, with the help of a particular rabbi that was explaining things, the family understood and didn't exercise their right to appeal to the Supreme Court. But if I'd ordered an autopsy and they didn't agree, they have 48 hours to go to the Supreme Court and see what they think. So, but it's hard, so in the end, hardly ever happens that we would override. It needs to be some sort of danger to the whole community, rather than if the family doesn't want the insights that an autopsy might give, that's fine. We wouldn't make it. Jody, did you have something to add there?
Sorry, might just give somebody else if there is.
Jody, did you have something else to say on that?
I was just going to talk about the time a deceased person is with us to go through that process. You know, I know your community, we need to release as quickly as possible, but sometimes we just can't. We try, and there's no doubt that we can't release within 24 or 48 hours. The best that we can do is work very closely with our funeral directors that work with your community, make sure we're speaking to the right people, making sure we've got the medical information that we need, and try and do it as quickly as possible. But I certainly acknowledge that we can't sometimes release.
A question actually for Simon. Where does your role intersect?
Okay. Yes, so thanks for that, Michael. We're actually experiencing a call. All of our responders in the room are all buzzing and going berserk because there's a case going off.
If you need to, please go.
Yeah, obviously they will. They will. So yeah, our role really within our community comes in sometimes even before the coroner comes in. In fact, many times before the coroner comes in, they don't even usually know about the case, and we're telling them about the case that they're about to get and whatnot. So we tend to, given the cultural sensitivities and our needs for burial quickly, and that the culture is the minute somebody passes away, and sometimes it's actually the minute somebody passes away, we are getting a call. Sometimes we're even getting called before they pass away, that they're about to pass away, and so we're informed and we're on top of it, which is, you know, I think, Jody can correct me if I'm wrong, makes their job a little bit easier because we're providing them a whole bunch of information about family, about context and whatnot, that they don't have to then sort of seek out, and they've got that, which makes it move through the system much faster. In answer to your and addressing your question, they claim and state that the bodies usually stay 5 to 7 days. Our experience is very, very different, where it can be a lot less. They don't commit to any commitments and timeframes, but I can attest that sometimes a body's been in and out within 24 hours. So again, there are a lot of things that need to fall into place to allow that to happen, and part of that is informing us and assisting the process. Anybody else? Because I've got a bunch of questions. You got one more.
Sorry, just one more, but I think you've answered before. In terms of once a decision is made by the coroner, is there a process of appeal, and where does that go to?
Yes. There are certain, you have certain rights of appeal about time-critical decisions, and then otherwise you have the general rights of appeal about the rest of the processes. So the time-critical decisions are the decision to have whether to have an autopsy or not. Then when we make a finding in the end, there's a whole lot of decisions made on the way. We call them, you know, interim, interlocutory decisions, and then there's a final decision. So you have 6 months to appeal a final decision. You don't have a right to appeal all the little interlocutory decisions, like what did I look at, but you have to. If you ask the court, they might give you permission. So that's how that works. You have some hardwired and time-critical appeal decisions that have to be made within 48 hours. Otherwise, you get 6 months to look at the whole package.
What process do you have to verify the senior next of kin?
What processes?
Yeah, I mean, if I call up and I say I'm the son of so-and-so, I mean, what proof do you need?
We do take, that's a question that I get asked a fair bit, and we do take the word of the person that we're speaking to. When we have a dispute where you've got two family members that are claiming to be the senior next of kin and have different views on the funeral director or different views on the process, then we have to go down a dispute pathway, and that does take a while. But in the first instance, we do generally believe people that ring us. And we have to do that because we have so many phone calls at that point in time, and we do know that we need to release a person as quickly as possible to their funeral director. We do the best to ask those questions, but if there is a dispute, we will go down that pathway. Does that answer the question?
And then the coroner, as a judge, is just comparing the evidence. But that's hearsay evidence, or that's documentary evidence, but was it, who produced it, what's the provenance? All those usual lawyer things come into.
But you're not going to BDM and finding out who the children are or who the spouses are, etc., who's registered anywhere? I mean...
So if we don't have
Sorry,
anyone...
BDM for those that are births, deaths and marriages.
So if we don't have anyone at all, then we will go down, we'll ask the police to investigate. So they search BDM, they search Centrelink, they go through a whole lot of different pathways of trying to find the family. We actually, unfortunately, have a number of deceased that stay with us for a long period of time, but they just have no family and no one to bury, and then we have to refer to the state trustees.
If I was an RN at an aged care facility and I've got a 97-year-old who's very weak and has a tendency to slip out of bed, should I be reporting that as a fall? That's a fall. That's called a fall, not just I couldn't have enough strength to get out of bed.
So this is when we get the RN or we get the doctor to call us.
Again, sorry to interrupt. RN, registered nurse.
Yes. So the doctor will call us. They'll say they have a 97-year-old woman who's had a recent fall. We will ask that doctor, was that fall directly or indirectly responsible for the death? So did that person lose consciousness? Was that person conscious beforehand and quite able to walk around? And if the death is related to the fall, yes, it is reportable. One of the things we've recently changed, and again, the court is trying to look at different ways to expedite. We know that elderly people fall, and this is a huge number of our reports. If we have a full medical report in a hospital and fully documented, only a recent change is that we do not need that deceased person to come into us. So an elderly person that dies in a hospital as a result of a fall, and there's no concerns of care by the family and no concerns of care raised by the doctor, because we do need to look at the concerns of care or the care of our elderly, then that deceased person doesn't always need to come into us.
So we don't call the body in, we still do an investigation. We get a deposition, like a sworn statement from the medical facility about what went on. We get all the records, and then we do the investigation, that's on the papers, and we don't require the body to be sent in.
I've got another follow-up question and then I'll continue to... Sorry?
Yep, if you fit those criteria, it's got to be that the family's not upset, they don't have concerns of care, and a doctor at the hospital will give us a deposition, which is a sworn statement about what went on. Yep, then we don't need it.
I'll just give you another case, a hypothetical. Somebody dies choking at their dinner table. Ambulance are in attendance. They confirm that they are deceased and that they died from choking. Micah says we know why he died, so it's not reportable because we know why he died, he choked. And so it gets handed over to funeral directors. Is that a reportable offence? Is that a reportable incident?
It's unexpected, the choking event. So even say in a nursing home where someone's got a recognised dysphagia problem and they're being fed and monitored for that, you would still need probably report it, because you couldn't say for sure what bit was there something stuck in their throat, or was there some other process where the airway was blocked and it became a heart attack, and those sort of things. So in the end, there's hardly ever that someone could actually say, I don't look like you're choking, but could you as a doctor say that? Probably not. You probably need our help.
So the answer is yes.
But,
if you're choking
yes. We're sort of,
and you died,
if I can pause
you're going to
on
coroner.
this little point, Simon. Judges are never allowed to give advisory opinions. So I can't tell you how it's going to go. But so what I'm doing here is saying that'd be unlikely possible. So that, you know, it can be a bit frustrating to hear all this caveating and fudging, but you have to keep your independence so that when you look at each case, you just look at what's actually happened.
Yep. Get it. You've had a turn. I'll come back to you, Mayo.
Thanks for coming tonight. For a Hatzolah response-wise, often we might get to patients that have basically died already on scene prior to our arrival. We will often not even start resuscitation, us, an ambulance, and often the cause of death, especially if it's someone that lives alone, isn't very obvious. You know, we might find them in the toilet, on the way, in the kitchen, and often I've heard certain cases where sometimes you'd say, well, yes, we'd like the body, and sometimes based on maybe paperwork, medications, medical appointments that we found at home and police have passed on to you, you'd say to us, well, they don't have to come to us. So I guess, what do you look at and what kind of, I know there's no set answer, but burden of evidence, what can tip the scale one hand to the other?
I think this would be when there is, it appears that, you know, it's an elderly person, they've got a lot of medical conditions. It will really depend on, I think at that point, whether the doctor can be contacted and whether or not they are, or it's anticipated that the doctor will be able to write a death certificate. So sometimes if it's happened at 2 a.m. in the morning, or the doctor's, it's the weekend and they're not contactable till the next day, I think, am I right, that they can go with the funeral directors. If it's anticipated that a doctor will be able to, sometimes it turns out that the doctor, after reviewing it, might say, no, I'm not satisfied to write a death certificate, so then it will get transferred to the court.
Yes, so we will often even get rung by police in that circumstance, and to say, anyone that dies after 5 o'clock and the GP practices have closed before 9 o'clock in the morning, and has got a health history, we'll advise to go to a funeral home and not come to us, because we're hoping we'll get a death certificate, especially if you've got medical people there that can attest that it's been a natural event. So exactly what Prima said.
I'd like to ask a question. If you do have to perform an autopsy, what happens to the body parts that you either remove or the blood? We normally bury even the blood from the deceased.
So when an autopsy is performed, all the body parts get examined and then get returned to the deceased. There are some circumstances where we may have to retain something, particularly in a case of a suspicious death, for a longer period of time. That is done with consultation to the family, or sometimes, unfortunately, in certain circumstances, we may have to keep it for a while, and it's very rare. We do then tell the family, but the coroner directs us to. Very rare, small circumstances. Otherwise, all the organs get returned to the deceased.
Just another question. Sometimes I'm working a funeral parlor in the Chevra Kadisha, and sometimes we have cases that there is an elderly that passed away and the doctor is not available. Either he's overseas or he's offline. And that's caused a lot of stress to the family, particularly, and so most of cases go to you, to the coroner. Is there any other ways to reach to medical access to avoid these stressful times for the family?
Is it the case that anyone from the clinic can...
So if a person is visiting here from overseas, you talk...
No. It's a patient from here, but their GP is unavailable. They're on holidays. They're on a cruise in Maldives.
Especially, yes. So again, this is another circumstance where my staff spend a lot of hours calling GP practices and speaking practice managers. we explain to the practice that they actually can issue a certificate, even though that GP is overseas, if they've got full access to the medical records. But in saying that, it's actually up to the doctor or GPs there for their professional opinion to write one. I can encourage, I can document, I can explain to them that, but a GP at their practice, if the other GPs have full access to the medical records, then they can still write a death certificate.
We can, coroners have coercive powers, that's called. We can make people do things, but I can make them give us the records they have. I can make them answer a question, but I can't make them write a death certificate.
We're looking at different ways. We know this is an issue, particularly as our GPs are really under the pump and really working hard. So often for us to get to speak to a GP and try and convince them to write a death certificate, we are looking at different ways.
Okay.
A slightly trickier question. When you've got a senior next of kin and they're estranged parents and a child who's an adult child, what happens when there's a dispute about release of the body?
The hierarchy of who to release it to is hardwired into the legislation, mostly to stop fights. So like any hardwired system, it can be a bit brutal, but if you're still married, even though you're separated, a marriage certificate trumps who's next in the hierarchy. So we work through the hierarchy. If people look like they're equal, it's a contest of evidence, and that's how we do it. So it is, and it's an unhappy space. Like whilst we're going through those legal pathways, Jodie's team are also talking to the people saying, look, it doesn't make that much of a difference who's the senior next of kin. You can all both have the information. You know, it's unlikely you're both probably going to be present at the funeral. Do we really care? We try to talk them off the ledge as well. But if it has to be a judicial determination, that's our job and we'll decide it. Yep. So, and then we just go the hierarchy. Most times the hierarchy answers it, and sometimes you're both equal in the hierarchy, and then you're looking for the best evidence.
I think we'll make just the last question, and we'll call it an evening.
I'm actually dealing with a case at the moment where the senior next of kin is living overseas and has some mental health issues. So, like, how does that work if they're not available? Yes.
So being overseas is not a problem with communications, but if they mentally don't have the capacity for it, then they're not available. So again, with that evidence, usually that would come to light when someone else was contesting the senior next of kin issue, and by the time we looked at that evidence, you'd see the person didn't have the mental capacity, so the coroner would rule them out and it'd go next to the next person on the hierarchy. Need some evidence.
I just want to say thank you very much for presenting to our community. This is more than once that I've heard them present, and I've attended the coroners, and I still keep on learning tidbits of information. So I'm hoping that everybody else here is going to walk away from this evening a lot more informed and a lot more understanding of the process. As each one of them have said, they're available 24/7. So if anybody does have any questions that they want to ask, 2 a.m. is a great time to hit them up because they're usually not that busy. But in all seriousness, thank you very much. You guys do an amazing job. The way that you relate to our community is greatly appreciated. We respect the work that you do, and we just hope that you continue doing that and assisting our community in the way that you have in the past. Thank you very much.